Okay, so hello, and welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're in the world you are joining us today. Thank you so much for tuning in to the third annual Aquatic Life Conference, and welcome to the Aquaculture Feed Innovation session. For those of you who I have not had the pleasure of meeting yet, my name is Tessa Gonzalez, and I'm the Senior Researcher at the Aquatic Life Institute. And joining me today is Sofika Kosniak, who is our Managing Director, Kevin Fitzsimmons, and David. David, did I pronounce that correctly?
It's pronounced Say.
Say. Okay, perfect. Thank you for correcting me. Okay, welcome everyone. So just a few housekeeping things that we'd like to go over as you've seen at the beginning of each session. As an attendee, you are muted upon entry with cameras off. Please use the Q&A box to post your questions throughout the discussion. We have time allocated to answer your questions after both speakers have finished their presentations. Every session is being recorded, and during the Aquatic Life Conference, we aim for respectful and productive discussions, and there's zero tolerance for harassment or discrimination of any kind. With that being said, our team at the Aquatic Life Institute will be closely monitoring the Zoom chat and Whova during the conference. So if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to send us a direct message. This session is about 45 minutes long, and we have two extraordinary panelists with us today. First, we'll hear from Dr. Kevin Fitzsimmons, who is a co-founder and judge for the F3 Future of Fish Feeds Initiative and their associated F3 challenges. Wow, talking is a struggle this morning. Dr. Fitzsimmons, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Let me go ahead and I'll pull up a, I should share screen first. And okay, does that look good for everybody?
Is it possible to do full screen on the slide?
I thought I was on full screen. It is on my computer. Was the other day. You're not seeing a full screen? You're just seeing the PowerPoint?
Kevin, I think you're sharing the file browser rather than the PowerPoint application.
Okay. Let me close that one then. Up. Sorry, I can't see it when I'm sorry, I had this all worked out the other day.
Up at the top, Kevin, is it possible to open it with the PowerPoint right next to properties?
Yeah, no, I had another window open was the problem.
Okay.
Okay, now screen share. Did I do it properly now?
Perfect.
Okay, sorry for that. I thought I had them
No worries.
right windows in the right places. Anyway, so I'm going to be talking about novel feed ingredients and what it means for the sustainability of the aqua feeds industry. And I should be able to do this because I just did it an hour and a half ago at a conference here in Spain. So let's go ahead. So just as a reminder, aquaculture, we are basically domesticating and farming various aquatic animals and plants. And we're basically redoing what we did in terrestrial agriculture over the last 5,000 years. We're trying to do it in 50 years with aquaculture. It's happening very quickly. The majority of all seafood in the world now is farm raised, approaching 60%, in fact. And with aqua feeds, we're really shifting right now from feeding high levels of fish meal and fish oil to more sustainable and economic formulated feeds as we proceed here. When aquaculture got going really 40, 50 years ago, it was real typical to use what we call extensive feeds. Basically, we were really doing more of fertilizing ponds and things like that than we were really feeding the animals. Then when we started formulating feeds, they used a lot of fish meal for the protein, a lot of fish oil for the fats and lipids, and then usually some grains for carbohydrates. But then as aquaculture industry was growing, the demand for fish meal and fish oil increased. And basically aquaculture bought up the available supply from poultry and dairies and other users. But this really led to a lot of overfishing for forage fishes. And so then we started using alternative ingredients that would typically be found in livestock feeds, things like soy and wheat and vegetable oils, to supply the amino acids, fats, and carbohydrates in the aquatic animals. Then when we got into the 80s, 90s, 2000s, it got so that we were actually feeding more soy and wheat and vegetable oils than we were fish meal. But it got to be a little more complicated to make sure we got all of the nutrients proper in the diet. One of the nice things that we see now is we need to have alternative ingredients that are closer to what the aquatic animals naturally consume rather than these terrestrial ingredients that they're not so used to. But as we realize, if we take more and more forage fish, that's taking away from other fisheries, marine mammals, seabirds, and things like this. So as aquaculture is growing, it's really becoming critical that we find these alternatives. So we really, in the last few years, have really focused on finding these novel ingredients and ones that are more sustainable and closer to what the animals are eating. So for example, when you observe a lot of our aquaculture species, the tilapias, the catfishes, shrimp and crabs, they actually graze on a lot of algae and biofilms that they get in the environment. Some of them, like tilapia, small shrimp, filter feed phytoplankton. And then they also are constantly picking at seaweeds and seagrasses. And as these decay, they'll eat even more because many of the species we're using are detritivores. A lot of freshwater fishes, trouts and stuff, eat insects as one of their main parts of their diet. So insect meal is perfectly acceptable. And detritus, a lot of these aquatic animals are detritivores. They're eating fungi, bacteria, and other single cell proteins that would grow on decaying animals and plants. So right now we're seeing really an explosion in new ingredients. Insect meals, about every month, there's some article about the world's biggest insect farm getting ready to open as they leapfrog over one another, building bigger and bigger farms and putting out more and more product. The animal byproduct industries, the big animal feed people, Tyson's and Hormel and Darling in Australia, are doing lots and lots of of these ingredients that are readily available. And single cell protein, a lot of these companies are coming on, and David will have more to talk about there, so I'll go over that quickly. Algae meals, algae oils, Corbion, Verimeris, probably the two biggest, already have a significant share of supplying fish oil into salmonid diets for trout and salmon. Fermentation technologies, we've got big companies like Alltech and Menon that are in this. Schooler's another big company. And then we have a couple of GMO soil oil seed crops. Cargill and ConAgra, two huge agribusinesses, are each have a product in that space. And then we have the traditional plant byproduct, the USEC and Green Plains, U.S. Soybean Export Council, providing products. And for fish oil, we have whole books that have been written on this subject because it is so important for aquaculture feeds that we replace the very limited and very expensive fish oils. So one thing that we need to remember and is important to educate everybody in the value chain, from the farmers, the feed mills, all the way to the consumers, is that there are no required ingredients that, as long as you get the right nutrient mix, that's what's critical. And we don't think that there's going to be any single replacement for fish meal or fish oil. What we expect is that there will be multiple ingredients that will be formulated so that we get all of the nutrients that are required for a well-balanced feed. And that fish, shrimp, crabs, other aquatic animals really don't care where these nutrients come from, whether it comes from fish meal, from beef, bacteria, yeast. It doesn't make any difference to them any more than it does for us where we get our protein, where we get our fats, as long as we get the right nutrients in the right concentrations, we can be perfectly healthy. This is just some clips I grabbed off of the internet a couple days ago of how quickly these things are coming online, of new products, single cell protein, microalgae, yeast extracts that are all coming on board with big investments in these companies. So, as I said, one of the nice things is that a lot of these novel ingredients are in fact much closer to what the aquatic animals would be consuming in nature. The new ingredients, a lot of the single cell stuff, algae meals, insect meals, probably aren't going to be widely consumed by humans, at least not in the immediate future. But one of the other nice things is sustainability wise is that we can produce these, whether it's on a square meter or per liter of water, per unit of energy, much more efficiently than we can get fish meal, fish oil, or even terrestrial crops. And many of these will actually sequester greenhouse gases, methane, carbon dioxide in the process. So that's a real win. So I've been involved with this Future of Fish Feed initiative. We've been running contests promoting fish meal and fish oil free ingredients. We've had a couple of meetings. David has been kind enough to join us for a couple of those. And I think we had webinars. David was one of our speakers there as well. We also are funding research on some of these diets, and we have developed a website that has a lot of ingredient information, diet formulations, standardized experimental design so that people can compare apples to apples, oranges to oranges, rather than doing things all separately. The first contest we had a $200,000 prize for the company that could produce the most fish-free feed and sell it to farmers. And Guangdong Evergreen, a big feed company in China, was the winner of the first prize, $200,000 for the feeds that they sold in China. It was about 85,000 metric tons of feed. Then we had a second contest to replace fish oil, again with a $200,000 prize that we were able to collect the money from a number of environmental NGOs and World Bank that helped us. Veramaris was the winner in that contest for the large amount of oil that they produced from algae and then sold into the salmonid industry. We had a third contest where we actually got $100,000 for each of three contests, one for salmonids, one for shrimp, and one for marine fishes. And we just announced those winners last week at the goal meeting in Seattle. Salmonids was won by Star Milling, making trout diets in California. The shrimp was won by Epengran, a big shrimp company down in Ecuador. And then a Chinese company, Futide, won the, or Fat Tide, excuse me, Fat Tide, won the contest for feed for fish in China, bass and some other species that they were growing. So what we're, with F3, what we're really trying to do is to eliminate, or at least cut way back on the wild-caught fish meal and fish oil in favor of more sustainably sourced ingredients. The main reason is we think that we need to leave a lot more forage fish in the ocean for marine predators. And so we believe that there are a lot of sustainable ingredients that are coming on board, and that as long as these ingredients can supply the nutrients that are necessary, that we could probably totally replace fish meal and fish oil in a relatively short period of time. But the other thing that we need to do is we really need to educate both the farmers, the processors, the buyers, and even consumers of seafood, that these fish-free feeds are equivalent to grass-fed beef or free-range chicken or cage-free pork, that we can provide better protection for the environment. Hopefully, the consumers would have to spend even fewer of their food dollars with these more sustainable ingredients. So thank you. We ask everybody to remember to eat fish-free seafood, and I will stop there and turn it over to David. Stop sharing.
Hello there. So I'm David Say, the CEO of Nova Nutrients. And I'm going to talk about a way to capture carbon dioxide emissions and make high-value protein to feed the world, starting with aquaculture. And so, my presentation is going to build off of what Kevin's presented, but focus very specifically on my area of expertise, which is bacterial proteins. And therefore, it'll have a little bit of a more promotional bent, but I hope it will be educational in this narrow realm. So what we're talking about are two large problems at the global level. One that I'm sure people are very familiar with, which is just the sheer amount of carbon dioxide emissions that are going up into the atmosphere every year. It's about 40 billion tons a year coming off of civilization, and that's measured in equivalent tons of carbon dioxide, but includes all the greenhouse gases. And the motivating factor behind this discussion of aquaculture feed is, of course, the growth in aquaculture, which is driven by this massive transition. Some would even call it a crisis in terms of the amount of protein that's available for food, which is really driven by the fact that the global middle class has expanded significantly in recent decades and will continue to do so. And one of the first things that happens as people emerge from poverty or lower socioeconomic status is that their diet changes and they start generally eating more animals as sources of protein. And aquaculture, of course, has been the fastest growing major part of the world food system since I think the 1970s. And so this is a significant part of the challenge, but also part of the solution, because aquaculture is a much more efficient use of feed ingredients than other forms of terrestrial animal production. To explain a little bit, sort of the overview of where we would sit in relation to these problems, we have a gas fermentation technology that is a solution primarily for these emitters, right? These are large industrial or energy companies that have massive point sources of carbon emissions. So that could be a cement factory, a steel plant, a refinery. And today there are not economical, large-scale ways to capture that carbon. There are a lot of efforts that are underway, but there are a few that are actually promising without being costly. And we think we offer one that can be a meaningful part of that solution on that side at a moderate scale. On the other side, as was Kevin's discussion, there is a need for protein ingredients, and it's not just for aquaculture, but also for alternative food products, your plant-based meats, and things like that, and also for pet food. And so the products of this gas fermentation technology can be a solution for these companies that manufacture feeds and foods that basically make multi-ingredient feeds and foods. So to zoom in to the microscopic level first, we're talking about microbes, in our case, bacteria, that from a business perspective are really adding significant value to the key inputs of carbon dioxide and renewable energy in the form of hydrogen. So what we diagram here is types of bacteria that we use, and some others that we don't, that have this special metabolism where they can take small molecules, primarily gases, hydrogen gas, carbon dioxide gas, and oxygen, as the inputs that they need to grow, to reproduce, to do their cell doubling, and get geometric growth, which can be very effective way to create biomass, and in this case, protein-rich biomass. So with the addition of ammonia and some of the other compounds normally required for life, this gives these bacteria everything they need to do that growth and to produce all the proteins, lipids, vitamins, and enzymes that they need for life, which also mean that they're a really dense package of nutrition that's useful for other organisms, including fish and shrimp. And we think fish and shrimp is the area of most urgent demand, and that's why I note that that's where we'll be starting. And so what you see on the right here these are dried bacteria produced in this fashion that have then been, roughly textured. We now do, this is an old photo, we now do much finer and more consistent texturing. And so these are the product. This is the feed ingredient. And so it's something that, as we'll see later, has a very high protein level with minimal need for processing. And it sort of is naturally concentrated. It doesn't require any further processing to create protein concentrates of the type that Kevin was talking about, because these bacteria are in the 70 and 80% protein. We'll talk about commercializing 73% crude protein dry weight. So to make things a little bit more visual, what you can see in the 6 cells on the left are the direct and indirect inputs for our process, and on the right, the types of products we can make. So we're talking about carbon capture from these industrial energy sources. Gasification is a way to take solid wastes, including municipal waste, make that into C1 gases and hydrogen. You can take renewable energy sources like solar, wind, and hydro and put them into electrolyzers, which, if you think back to a high school chemistry class, there was probably an experiment where you applied electricity to water to split the hydrogen and the oxygen in the H2O. That's what electrolyzers do in a very efficient way and in an increasingly economical way. And so the products are protein for aquaculture. Bacteria are much better generally at making protein than they are at making fats. So this is really, you can think of it as a fish meal replacement. And then we'll talk also about how we can make higher value products, such as the carotenoids, which are very useful in salmon and shrimp feeds. So to get into the nature of what a bacterial protein like ours, and specifically ours, is, why don't we start on the right, and you can see the overall composition. So this is, again, on a dry basis, that 73% protein that I mentioned earlier, about 5% fats. We have an approach that has natural hemes, which are sort of blood-like molecules, vitamin B. Then the balance is other organic compounds, some minerals, and there's essentially no starches, fiber, storage carbohydrates, polysaccharides. And so when we talk about what the nutrition required for aquaculture is, one of the key things is the amino acid profile. Amino acids are the building blocks of protein. These are the kind of things that if you go into a vitamin shop, there are products for human bodybuilders that focus on specific amino acids. And our protein is complete. It has all the essential amino acids for fish, shrimp, people. It's a super complete protein. In testing, it's shown digestibility in what would put it into the super prime category when you're thinking about fish meals, depending on inclusion rate between 91 and 95% digestibility. And this natural product has been approved in the one place where we've sought approval for it, which is Japan, for use across all animal feeds, including aquaculture. We've done a number of trials. I'll show the first one, which is probably the simplest to understand here. So you can see in orange is a feed with a high inclusion rate of our product, the Nova Nutrients protein. The bottom line shows the survival, which is the initial safety study, and equivalent survival with the blue line, which is the fish meal based control diet. On the growth side, you can see that the fish fed our diet start a little bit behind, but then catch up and surpass in terms of growth rate by the end of the trial. Separately, we also did digestibility and palatability, the trials which you saw the digestibility results on the prior slide. Palatability is really, attempting to estimate how good it tastes or how much, in this case, fish are attracted to it. And one of the measures that's used there is strike time. What's the amount of time between when the feed is introduced in the water and when the fish get their mouths on on the pellets or the extruded pieces of feed. And one result that we found was found by the Japanese Scientific Feeds Association that performed the trial was that the strike times for our feed were about half that of the control diet featuring super prime, gold standard fish meal, which is quite interesting. So fish don't care about the source of their protein, but different proteins essentially smell and taste differently to them and can influence the amount of wasted feed, which can be a key, economic drain on a farm if substantial amounts of the feed are not getting consumed, which could be the case if there's poor palatability in the feed. Just to put a few more numbers on it, these figures are a little bit outdated, but the general point I think is correct. We're looking here across all animal feeds, not just aquaculture, and essentially at the higher value, higher protein feed ingredients. And so fish meal, which we've been talking about a lot today, is a big chunk of this, around $8 billion. Similar level coming from plant protein concentrates, including things like pea proteins and soy proteins, which we show here in their the concentrate versions. Also, some of these byproducts from meat processing, from poultry, meat and bone and blood meal. And then on the right, you can see the values per ton associated with these, and that pea protein quite expensive because a lot of that gets actually sold into human food diets. For example, the Beyond Meat products, and then fish meal is really the next most valuable major protein concentrate that we're talking about here, and that's one of the things that makes it attractive for a business to substitute. And and its value is evidence of the sort of, you can think of it as a bit of an imbalance of supply and demand for this natural resource. One of the things that we can also do if we develop some of these bacteria further is we can have them make different additives in an integrated way so that we can deliver a product that has both protein and additives. And because of our focus on aquaculture, our initial focus, carotenoids were a very interesting additive, and particularly astaxanthin and canthaxanthin, which are essential for ideal growth and health and color in salmon, and can be much higher value bacterial protein meals than just the basic protein concentrate types that we were talking about in the previous slide. As I round up towards the end of my presentation, I want to point out sort of an interesting thing back on the carbon side, which is that the consulting firm BCG published a study earlier in the year that looks at, of all the different sectors that one could invest in to try to reduce carbon footprint, how effective is essentially putting a dollar into each of these sectors. And you can see that there's a very wide variation from investing in heavy road transport, essentially trucking, providing very low returns, to plant-based proteins, or you can really think about that as like any protein that's not based on an animal, including microbes and bacteria, is essentially 44 times a better investment than heavy road transport, and even 3 times better than cement, which is the next best one. The colors indicate also, how economical these are. Are these going to be cost centers, or do they have the possibility, for the one shown in green, of being profit areas? And there are only 3 power light road transport and plant-based proteins that have real prospects for being what they call mostly economic here, or potentially profitable. So what we're talking about here really are proteins that we'll make that are better, cheaper, and more sustainable than beef, fungus, insects, or we really think any of the main candidates here. And that's because they're based on abundant inputs. Carbon dioxide is the second greatest waste product of human civilization after water. It's incredibly resource efficient. in terms of how little energy needs to go into these. And then, fish meal can only be produced economically in a few regions in the world, whereas, a system based on renewable energy and CO2 like ours has a totally different distribution of where it can be made, and that can really even the playing field for production of aquafeed ingredients. And that's my presentation. Thanks.
Great, thank you both. That was really, really interesting. I have two comments. One from Kevin's presentation. You mentioned that it's essentially not single ingredients that need to be substituted, but rather the nutrients that need to be fulfilled within the feed. And I had come across a database during a conference, I think last year, that had some of these nutrient profiles for different species like tilapia and salmon and things. But even just taking a first glance at it, it's extremely overwhelming to see all of the nutrients that need to be satisfied for some of these feeds. So I think what you mentioned about education and really communicating these things with the farmers themselves will have a great impact in the long run. And in David's presentation, you had mentioned the strike time, which is something that I didn't initially think about in terms of perhaps that can be used as a measure to see what the fish actually prefer. So it would be interesting from especially a welfare perspective to see if they prefer these alternative to fish meal and fish oil. I think that could be an encouraging factor as well. So we have about 9 minutes for some questions. If you guys think of any other questions, please pop them into the Q&A and we'll do our best to get through them. The first question I'd like to ask you both are, what are some of the producers' attitudes towards current feed and or feed alternatives?
Well, I'll go ahead and start. And we talk with a lot of the big feed companies around the world, and I would say they are desperate to find alternatives. The supplies of fish meal and fish oil have been limited for a long time. The prices just keep going up and up and up. Fish oil over $2,000 a ton. Fish meal a little under $2,000 a ton. So they're very keen to have these ingredients coming on larger scale. Again, they recognize that there's not going to be a silver bullet. There's not going to be any one thing that they're going to use. So they're thrilled to have David's product. They're thrilled to have insect meal. They're happy to have algae meal because as you just very accurately pointed out, nowadays a typical formulated feed may have 20, 30 ingredients. So that we can get all of the nutrition there properly. And it's like humans. I mean, we can eat all kinds of different protein sources and all kinds of different foods that get us our nutrition. And there isn't any single food that every human has to eat. And that's the same with all the aquatic animals.
Great, thank you so much, Kevin. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, so in our experience, the aquaculture feed millers, the manufacturers, are very eager to speak about alternatives. They certainly recognize that they're really needed if they're going to be able to keep up with this growth in quantitative demand for aquaculture products and therefore for aquaculture feed. Because you just simply can't take more wild-caught fish of the kind that can be reduced into fish meal and fish oil out of the oceans. That really maxed out effectively in the early 1990s. But that being said, it's interesting to see, the public messaging around this. Like some of the major feed companies have explicitly said, hey, we're not going to pay more, or we're not going to be the only ones to pay more for sustainability is one of the things that they've said. But I think that that's more, positioning for their shareholder relations than it really reflects the reality of what we're going to see in the coming years. So that's something to keep in mind. But one thing is that, these folks have been at this for a long time. And as Kevin points out, solutions have been introduced gradually. And for all the successful ones, there are a lot of ones that have been unsuccessful. And in many cases, because some combination of the interrelated factors of they never got to scale or they were too expensive. And so there's also a healthy skepticism from these feed companies in the case of any particular alternative around these two issues. And so there's a bit of a vicious cycle there, or a negative feedback loop. And so I think that the alternatives sectors, whether it's for protein or fats going into aquaculture, can certainly benefit from help in sort of getting over this chasm and getting the promising solutions to scale and to and therefore to a low enough cost to start being used in quantity and have the effect that is desired, I think, by everyone.
Could you both perhaps talk about some of the existing supply constraints that are present with fish meal and fish oil compared to the alternatives that were discussed today? Are they quite similar? I mean, I know, David, you just mentioned the costs perhaps being a barrier to more overall uptake in the industry, but I'm just curious if when you break it down to the real core of the supply constraints, if perhaps they are similar and could be used as a tactic to convince more alternatives to be used instead?
So there have been some supply constraints with fish meal and fish oil, but I think they would probably fit in the category of so many of the other commodity constraints that we have just for shipping around the world. Then there are some kind of seasonal problems with El Nino events in Ecuador and Peru, and some things like that. But the gross amount of fish meal, fish oil that's available doesn't really change a whole lot from year to year. It's been pretty stable now for 20 years. It's just that the demand keeps going up and up and up all the time. So, if demand goes up and supply stays the same, the price goes up. Pretty basic economics. With the alternative ingredients, some like algae oil people, they're very quickly taking market share as that industry is increasing along with aquaculture. And some of the others, single cell proteins, the insects, the algae meals, they're somewhat behind. And then something like soybean and soy protein concentrate, things like that, they're readily available. Those are big industries that supply lots of different livestock sectors.
I would just add that if we look into the longer term, it's interesting to think about what will constrain the supply of each of these alternatives, right? So the things that are based on agriculture are the plant protein concentrates like soy, and really the animal meat processing byproducts, because those of animals are of course fed plant products. And then also many of the fermented products are fermented on sugar, which is also a product of agriculture. And the reason why I focus on this is all these agricultural products are limited by the amount of arable land, the water for irrigation, the essentially natural gas to produce fertilizer. And so and it's all tightening because these are competitive, agricultural products are by their nature those fundamental resources that go into agriculture can be used for food as well, which is, expanding in a similar way to aquaculture. And so that's one of the reasons why we think it's so important to look at alternative food supplies that are non-agricultural, right? And so using renewable energy and carbon dioxide as the key inputs puts you in a totally different type of constraint, where there's just a lot more room to grow and develop. And we think that's one of the reasons why the approach we're taking is so promising. And insects are another one where, they're essentially being fed agricultural products. And there's also challenges in just collecting, waste at the kind of scale that we need to be thinking specific waste for insect production at the scale that I think Kevin and I are thinking about, which is, megatons of protein production per year, even in the relatively, near future.
Thank you both. We will wrap up with just one more question before time is called on this session. So what are your thoughts on disclosing the feed used to produce the seafood product? So some of the certification labels that we are advocating for better welfare are Aquaculture Stewardship Council, for example, Global GAP, Global Animal Partnership. So what are your opinions on perhaps using the amount of fish oil being used, or the brand, or the alternatives that are being explored, and adding it to this kind of label so that the consumers are now aware of what their seafood products are being fed?
Yeah,
David,
I
why don't you go first? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to say something about that. So I think one thing that we don't want to lose in labeling are the real advantages to aquaculture production of protein food versus terrestrial animal production. And so one of the things I'm skeptical about for like seafood specific labeling is it'll draw more negative attention in an unfair way if other meat products aren't subject to some kind of parallel labeling. And so I'm much more in favor of broad-based food labeling that indicates ethical issues and sustainability metrics rather than very specific labels that I think could well be more counterproductive than productive for improving our food system.
And I'll just add quickly to that I don't think most of the ingredient companies are going to have a problem with having their product listed on the ingredient list that goes on the feed bag. I don't see that being any kind of problem. And in fact, ASC, Monterey Bay, most of the certifying organizations are very quickly shifting their rubrics to encourage even more of these sustainable ingredients and minimize the amount of fish meal and fish oil being used in the diets. So they're certainly on board of trying to use these more sustainable ingredients and rewarding companies that use these in their rubrics of how they're grading things, and as they upgrade their certification schemes constantly to further encourage the more sustainable ingredients and penalize the fish meal, fish oil in feeds.
That's a great point, and something we looked at, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with our certification schemes benchmark, but that was one of the criteria points that we were analyzing within these standards is there a current max limit for fish meal, fish oil that is required to be certified? And also, is there that encouragement that you mentioned to move towards other alternatives that are sustainable? So thank you both so much. Unfortunately, we're out of time for this session, but I just wanted to thank all of the attendees for tuning in, and a big thank you to our wonderful panelists.
Thank you for having us. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. And the Aquatic Life Institute is heading into COP27 next month, like we mentioned earlier, where we'll be calling on global leaders to prioritize aquatic animal welfare in the global goals. And we'd love for everyone to follow our journey on LinkedIn, and please share our call to action across your networks. And we will paste that in the chat for you guys. We right now have a short break before our keynote speech from a member of the European Parliament that starts at 12:45 EST. So we will all see you there. And thank you again.
Thank you.